There was a great deal of silence in London on the day of Charlie Watts' funeral. The world watched, cameras flashed, and fans gathered. However, there was a problem. His closest bandmates did not attend the celebration, for the man who had quietly kept the Rolling Stones beat going for decades. It was shocking to millions that the people he had spent a lifetime with didn't show up, especially for a drummer who helped define the sound of one of the best bands ever. There were rumors of personal problems, health problems, and old grudges, and everyone was wondering why they hadn't shown up. Charlie Watts's early life and career. Charlie Watts was born Charles Robert Watts in Bloomsbury, London, on June 2, 1941, and grew up in a modest family. His mother, Lillian Charlotte Watts, had worked in a factory before, and his father, Charles Richard Watts, was a lorry driver on the London, Midland and Scottish Railway. Charlie was also quite close to his younger sister, Linda, who was born in 1944. Charlie lived in 23 Pilgrims Way in Wembley when he was a youngster. His family, like many other families in the district, lived in a prefab after Luftwaffe bombs devastated much of the area's houses during World War II. Later in life, Charlie recalled the battle as more of a game, despite the dangers around him. "I heard bombs going off in the surrounding area. War seemed like a game to me when I was very little. I don't believe I ever felt truly afraid," he remarked. In 1946, Dave Green, Charlie's neighbor, moved in next door at 22 Pilgrims Way. Throughout their lives, the two maintained their strong friendship. Green, who later became a jazz bassist, remembers their early musical adventures. "We found records of 78 revolutions per minute. Compared to me, Charlie had more records. We used to simply pull these records out of Charlie's bedroom." Charlie's first love was jazz, and he collected records by such greats as the Johnny Dodds Trio, Thelonious Monk, Charlie Parker, and Jelly Roll Morton. In terms of taste and collecting, he even outperformed the other boys his age. After that, Charlie's family relocated to Kingsbury, where he attended Tyler's Croft Secondary Modern School from 1952 to 1956. He showed talent in sports, cricket, music, and art at school. Around the age of 13, he began to acquire a liking for drumming. He once talked about how he bought a banjo but didn't like the neck, so he removed it and started tinkering. He attempted using brushes to play the drums, after listening jazz drummer Chico Hamilton perform with Jerry Mulligan. He creatively placed the banjo head on a stand and practiced playing along with records, since he lacked a snare drum. He received a 12B drum kit for Christmas in 1955, and he spent hours playing the drums to his favorite jazz tunes. Charlie went to Harrow Art School after school, which is now the University of Westminster, where he studied until 1960. He worked as a graphic designer at Charlie Daniels Studios after finishing his studies. Music, however, was always accessible. From 1958 to 1959, he and Dave Green played with local jazz groups, like the Joe Jones All-Stars. When Charlie returned from a brief stint working in Denmark in 1961, he met Alexis Corner, the pioneer of British blues, and joined his band Blues Incorporated. He continued to work in advertising while playing with the band on a regular basis, eventually focusing on music full-time. Charlie Watts' private life. On October 14, 1964, Charlie Watts wed Shirley Ann Shepherd. Their marriage remained steady throughout his life, and he had known her before he joined the Rolling Stones. In March 1968, their daughter Serafina was born, and she went on to give Charlie Charlotte, his only granddaughter. After 57 years of marriage, Watts and Shirley remained devoted to one another, until Watts' death in 2021. Considering the chaos and allure of the rock and roll world surrounding him, their union was one of the longest and most enduring in music history. Offstage, Watts lived a quiet life. He established an Arabian horse farm at Halden House, which is close to Dalton, a peaceful village in North Devon. In addition to being a musician, he was also a wise co-owner of the Rolling Stones empire, having a stake in the band's various economic ventures. Watts never had a driver's license, in contrast to the other members of his band, who were well known for their love of ostentatious automobiles. He prefers to view cars as works of art rather than as tools for transportation. In addition, he loved cricket and collected cricket mementos. He enjoyed these activities away from the spotlight. It was a different matter entirely to travel. Life on the go was something Watts loved to despise. In a 2003 interview, he acknowledged that while he enjoyed performing with Keith Richards and the band, he detested the pop star lifestyle, which included yelling crowds and constant attention. After every tour, he would distance himself from the audience and declare, "I don't actually like touring." He was clearly not a fan of Hollywood norms. Even in the most decadent years of the band's popularity, he lived in devotion to Shirley, and would often decline the overtures of groupies. When Watts was invited to the Playboy Mansion on the 1972 American tour, for instance, he chose to investigate the game room instead of attending the festivities. "I've never filled the stereotype of the rock star," he stated. Watts also had a strong sense of personal boundaries and a sharp sense of humor. When Watts's drunken MC Jagger called his hotel room in the middle of the 1980s and demanded, "Where's my drummer?" Watts allegedly got dressed, went downstairs, and hit Jagger, saying, "Never call me your drummer again. You're my singer." He later apologized for the event and placed the blame on booze. In addition to his stage antics, Watts had a reflective disposition. He had between 12 and 15 diaries by 2001 that detailed every bed he had slept on while on tour since 1967. He was the Rolling Stones' steady, devoted heart because of his calm, methodical side, which complemented the band's insane, frenetic energy. The Rolling Stones are the main topic. In the 1950s, Keith Richards and MC Jagger first crossed paths as kids in Dartford, Kent. They were close friends while attending the same school. The boys continued to be friends even after Jagger's family moved a short distance to Wilmington in 1954. Together with his friend Dick Taylor, Jagger formed a garage band by the middle of the 1950s, performing blues hits by Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Howlin' Wolf, and Muddy Waters. On October 17, 1961, at Dartford Railway Station, Jagger and Richards reunited because of their shared passion for music. Richards saw right away that Jagger and Muddy Waters had similar musical tastes when he was carrying their recordings. One of the most illustrious songwriting partnerships in rock history began with that session. Later, Taylor and Jagger Richards started practicing together, first at Taylor's house and then at Jagger's. They went under the name Blues Boys. They discovered Blues Incorporated, led by Alexis Korner, at the Ealing Jazz Club in early 1962. They sent Korner a tape of their best work, which impressed him. Jagger and Richards were introduced to the world of professional music and new opportunities by Korner and his colleagues musicians, Brian Jones, Ian Stewart, and Charlie Watts. After that, Brian Jones posted a call for musicians in the jazz press, and Jagger, Taylor, and Richards joined him and Stewart. A few more people participated in the first rehearsals, but eventually left. And by June 1962, the band was formed with drummer Tony Chapman. "Rollin' Stone," a song by Muddy Waters that Jones saw on the floor, served as the inspiration for the band's name. Jones was regarded as the band's first leader, establishing its direction and sound. On July 12, 1962, the Rolling Stones performed for the first time as the group at London's Marquee Club. The iconic lineup was completed in January 1963, with Charlie Watts as the official drummer and Bill Wyman as the bassist later that year. The Stones were singing blues covers, touring Britain, and gaining a devoted following during the beginning of 1963. By encouraging rebellious attire, long hair, and transgressive publicity, their producer Andrew Lug Oldham helped them create their bad boy persona, in opposition to the Beatles' tidy, well-groomed image. In 1963 and 1964, the Stones released singles including "Come On" and "I Want to Be Your Man." They also went on their first U.S. tour, which started off strangely but brought them new admirers. With hits like "Get Off of My Cloud" and "I Can't Get No Satisfaction," the group was dominating the US and UK charts by 1965. They began writing more of their own songs around this time, and they experimented with psychedelic music on albums like their Satanic Majesty's Request in 1967. The Rolling Stones had established themselves as one of the most innovative and contentious bands in rock, despite internal problems and legal troubles. Charlie Watts' Rolling Stones career. In the middle of 1962, Charlie Watts went to the rhythm and blues clubs in London to meet Keith Richards, Ian "Stu" Stewart, Mick Jagger, and Brian Jones. Nevertheless, he did not formally join the Rolling Stones until January 1963. At the time, the band was still having financial difficulties, so they were unable to pay Watts the kind of consistent money he was receiving from his previous jobs. Despite this, he decided to join the band, and on February 2, 1963, he made his live debut as a full-time member at the Ealing Jazz Club. His strong, graceful drumming quickly caught the attention of both the audience and other musicians, and Jagger would often introduce him live as the Wembley Whammer, a handle that alluded to both his origins and his extraordinary skill behind the drums. Watts not only provided the Rolling Stones with a steady pace, but he also gave the band a creative touch. He contributed comic strips and graphic art to album covers early on, including the Between the Buttons album cover. He even worked with Jagger on some of the band's most famous live performances, helping to develop stage arrangements for tours. The elaborate lotus-shaped stage for the Americas tour, for instance, became a visual icon. Additionally, he helped design the stages for the Licks, Bridges to Babylon, Urban Jungle Tour, Steel Wheels, and A Bigger Bang tours. When he planned a surprise performance at a press conference in New York City in 1975, it was one of his more successful lighthearted endeavors. Aboard the Midst of Gridlock, the Stones played Brown Sugar while traveling through Manhattan aboard a flatbed truck. It was reminiscent of how jazz groups in New Orleans advertised their shows. Remarkably, Watts never missed a Rolling Stone performance during his career. From his first public performance in 1963 to his last live performance on August 30, 2019, at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, Florida, he gave his all and performed at every event. He is one of only 3 members to play on every Rolling Stones record, along with Richards and Jagger, a testament to his dedication and the essential role he played in the band's music. Charlie Watts' musical career extended much beyond rock and roll. Despite his most well-known role as the Rolling Stones' steady lead singer, Watts has always had a deep love for jazz, which influenced many aspects of his life. Whereas many of his comrades were free-range rockers, actually for him jazz was more than just a hobby. It was a lifelong love. Charlie took a very different approach in December 1964, when the Rolling Stones were just beginning to make an impression on the world. In homage to his favorite jazz saxophonist, Charlie Parker, he published a little cartoon book called Ode to a High-Flying Bird. Watts' unconventional, inventive, and intensely personal style demonstrated that he was more nuanced than most people thought a rock drummer should be. His love of jazz and classic rhythm and blues led him to collaborate with fellow Stone Ian Stewart by the late 1970s. They founded Rocket 88, a boogie-woogie band that was more traditional. This was no casual performance by unidentified musicians. It included some of the best jazz, rock, and R&B musicians in the UK. Charlie was able to develop his musical abilities in ways that were not possible for him, while still keeping up with the Stones thanks to Rocket 88. In the 1980s, he went one step further and put together the Charlie Watts Orchestra, a full-scale big band that performed all over the world. Imagine the Rolling Stones switching from rock venues to jazz clubs that feature performers like Jack Bruce, Courtney Pine, and Evan Parker. It demonstrated the level of regard Watts had for all genres. Charlie kept exploring. As a further homage to Charlie Parker, he formed a jazz quintet in 1991. He recorded Warm and Tender with singer Bernard Fowler in 1993, and Long Ago and Far Away in 1996 with this group. Many jazz fans hold dear the legacy of great songs from the Great American Songbook, which were honored in both editions. He did not, however, rely solely on jazz classics. Watts collaborated with fellow drummer Jim Kellner on Something Out of the Blue, a techno and instrumental album titled Charlie Watson, Jim Kellner Project. After working on the Rolling Stones' Bridges to Babylon album in 1997, the songs were titled Elvin Suite in honor of legendary drummers Roy Haynes, Max Roach, and Elvin Jones. It wasn't a question of copying their drumming techniques, Watts explained. The goal was to communicate the spirit and atmosphere they brought to the song. Charlie continued to be interested in jazz until the 2000s. He recorded Watts at Scott's at the renowned Ronnie Scott Jazz Club in London with his bands, the Charlie Watts Tented. He then joined an ensemble known as the ABC and D of Boogie Woogie in April 2009. Charlie's only requirement when approached to join the band by pianist Ben Waters was that his longtime friend Dave Green play bass. Charlie Watts was more than simply the Rolling Stones drummer, as seen by his straightforward and revealing statement, "If Dave does it, I'll do it." At his core, he was a true musician, who was always seeking out the sounds that motivated him and his well-being. Charlie Watts had a period of poor health and lifestyle in the middle of the 1980s. Previously moderate drug and alcohol consumption turned into excessive use. Since then, Watts has acknowledged that it was connected to his own problems. "I used them as a coping mechanism for family issues. The demands of fame, constant touring, and personal pressure drove him to habits that he would later admit were dangerous. He said, "I think it was a midlife crisis. All I know is that I became a completely different person around 1983 and came out of it about 1986. I almost lost my wife and everything over my behavior." Watts had made significant progress by the late 1980s, quitting smoking completely. But health issues continued, and in June 2004, he was diagnosed with throat cancer, which he successfully remitted with radiation therapy. Reflecting on his recovery, Watts recalled how the band's work schedule impacted his recuperation. After 8 months, Mick said, "We're going to do a record, but we'll only do it when you're ready. I went into hospital," he added. "Then I went on a 2-year tour. It looks like I get sick anytime we stop, so perhaps I should continue. They were bugging me about composing songs, and when I was ready, I went down and that was it. A bigger bang." Despite the fact that it wore him down physically, Watts remained devoted to drumming and touring well into his later years. And on August 5, 2021, he announced that he was postponing the return of the Rolling Stones' U.S. No Filter tour in order to undergo heart surgery. Watts' remarks touched on both his passion and his sense of humor, often joking that keeping busy playing music seemed to be his trick for staying healthy. During his lifetime, Watts balanced his love of music with the demands of aging and health issues, exhibiting a tenacity as strong as his steady, gentle demeanor behind the drums. Longtime friend and associate Steve Jordan temporarily filled in to play the drums on his behalf. Watts's decision to prioritize his health served as a reminder that even rock stars have to take a step back, occasionally, despite how much they love being on stage. The world lost one of rock music's most reliable and sophisticated drummers when Charlie Watts passed away in August 2021. But a few weeks later, the public's attention shifted to his funeral and the absence of some of his well-known band members. His ability to endure these hardships, while still contributing to one of the greatest rock bands in history, was admired by both his fans and colleagues. In contrast to his massive concerts and high-profile performances on stage, Watts's funeral was quiet and private, attended mostly by his immediate family. Astute fans quickly noticed that Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Ronnie Wood, and Bill Wyman were noticeably absent from the ceremony itself. News outlets like the BBC and Rolling Stone covered the story, emphasizing the private nature of the ceremony. Responses flooded social media, tributes poured in, Watts's pictures were circulated, and hashtags celebrating his life trended around the world. But with the love and respect came a flood of rumors, with some wondering why the Rolling Stones' main players, who had performed and toured with Watts for decades, were not present. Reporters covering the funeral noted that the Rolling Stones had always been a band of big personalities, with different ways of dealing with loss, and some fans interpreted their absence as cold or distant, while others suggested that there might have been arguments or lingering animosities. Some even believed the band was protecting Watts' family's privacy by not making the ceremony public. Rolling Stone magazine noted that Watts was always the least gregarious of the group, tended to avoid the spotlight, and suggested that perhaps what he would have wanted was a quiet funeral. The BBC reported on the disparity between the public's expectation of some pompous star-filled send-off and the private low-key ceremony that was actually conducted. Public opinion was divided. Some were disappointed or perplexed by the absence of Richards and Jagger, while others appreciated that the funeral had been kept small. Online debates demonstrated how much fans loved Watts and how much they felt a part of the Rolling Stones' history. Ultimately, the funeral and the discussion surrounding it demonstrated not only the public's fascination and interest in rock stars' private lives, which is why they didn't attend. Of course, the most anticipated MC, to everyone's surprise, Jagger, Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood were supposed to attend his funeral in Devon, UK, but they did not. At first, fans were confused, but there were several good reasons for their absence, chief among them being personal, practical, and health-related. The CO-19 travel restrictions were one of the main reasons. Jagger, Richards, and Wood were actually in Boston, Massachusetts, practicing with the Rolling Stones for their tour at the time, and it was inconvenient to travel to the UK due to strict quarantine regulations and the difficulty of making an impromptu trip. Another important factor was Charlie's own wish for a private funeral. Watts had been very private and modest in nature and had preferred to stay out of the spotlight whenever possible. A band representative confirmed that the band members simply could not attend due to travel issues. According to those close to the band, the Rolling Stones wanted to honor that. According to a representative, the Stones had to honor Charlie's request for a private funeral, because of his quiet, reserved demeanor, which extended to the planning of his farewell. Health issues were another pragmatic reason. The band members were all in their late 70s and early 80s by 2021, and because of the risks of traveling abroad during a pandemic and the fact that they were getting older, caution was even more crucial. Naturally, Jagger, Richards, and Wood put their own safety first, which contributed to their decision to skip the event. In addition, the Rolling Stones were getting ready for their No Filter tour, which had been canceled due to COVID-19. Finally, it's interesting to note that this wasn't completely out of character for the band, because they had already promised to continue the tour, and the absence of members could have disrupted their carefully planned plans. Charlie had retired from the tour due to health reasons, but the other band members had commitments that couldn't be so conveniently postponed. The fact that not all members attended the funeral of original member Brian Jones in 1969 shows that the Rolling Stones have always dealt with personal tragedy in different ways, and their absence does not always equate to disrespect. In other words, Jagger, Richards, and Wood's absence was a combination of honoring Charlie's wishes, addressing pandemic travel restrictions, prioritizing their own health, and meeting their professional commitments. Even the fans could continue to celebrate Charlie's extraordinary life through the music and memories he left behind. When we look back at Charlie Watts' life and legacy, it's evident that he was more than just the drummer of the Rolling Stones. It wasn't a sign of coldness or abandonment. It was just the practicality of living in a complex world. His passing left a huge hole in the music industry, but it also gave people a chance to think about what really made him special, not just his drumming, but the way he carried himself through decades of success. He was the band's heartbeat, the calm in the storm, and the one who never got caught up in the chaos of fame. This balance between international fame and a grounded personality is uncommon, and is one of the reasons people admired Charlie so much. His story also serves as a reminder of the value of stability in a world that is changing all the time. Charlie was a living example of the idea that you don't have to be loud to be powerful. He let his music speak for him on stage and lived a simple life off stage, prioritizing family, loyalty, and quiet over the spotlight. Even though Charlie is no longer with the Rolling Stones, his influence endures every time someone plays a Rolling Stones record or watches an old concert clip. Charlie was always there, keeping the rhythm steady, despite the band's drama, breakups, controversies, and reinventions. His presence gave the band its backbone and allowed the others to shine, knowing that he had their sound anchored. In the end, Charlie Watts left behind something timeless. He wasn't just part of music history, he was music history, and that's how fans will always remember him. His style, his grace, and his dedication to music set an example for younger generations of artists who want to survive in an industry that frequently burns people out. The story of Charlie Watt comes to an end here. His quiet power, classic drumming, and enduring impact will always be remembered. If you liked this video and would like to see more stories like this, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. You can also turn on the notification bell to ensure you never miss an update.